I was saying, there's three main ways to get data out of the IEDB in formats that you can use it in your projects. The full downloads, the custom exports on the results page, and then the API, which again has been touched on very briefly, but I'll go over them all with more detail now. So first off, I'm going to go through the full database exports because this is where you're going to go if you're going to want bulk data. If you want all of the data from the IEDB on a particular subject or a particular higher level node, I guess. So how to get to this is you're going to go to the header on all the IEDB pages, go to the database export, or go to the More IEDB tab here, go to the database export option, and then that'll pull up the export or the downloads page, which is you can see here. This is broken down into various different formats that you can then use. You have the XML database exports, which are various lists of the data in an XML format of the full database itself. The schema, which is a diagram, or sorry, excuse me, that's the XSD files of the IEDB database. The MySQL database exports, which are the actual physical databases that you can then load into your a MySQL database and query using standard SQL parameters and everything else, which is actually how we access the data and utilize the data for the website. You have the physical entity relationship diagrams, which is a PDF that diagram the structure of the data within our databases. So this is how you can get a good idea of how various fields link and how various tables come together. Then you get into these metric exports, which are the same as the database or the data that you would get from the export link on the results page. Just this is all of the data. And for some of them, they're broken down into single and multi-files just because of their sheer size of the data when you're dealing with potentially millions of rows that don't load into some viewers easily or to load them into your application easier. And then finally, you have the stable ID exports, which are links of IDs that we use within our database, which the examples that are shown here are the link out IDs, which are linking to external resources that you see in those details pages that Randy mentioned earlier. So from that, so that's where you would go if you want massive exports of the entire database. But more likely what you're going to want run your queries and then export the data that way specific to your parameters that you want. So what we came up with initially was a canned set of exports of different fields that you could export and consume in however you wanted. But we found that that was limited because, again, some people would want particular fields, some people would other fields. So we came up with this custom data export option, which its goals were to expand the usability of the exports, provide more information on each field, because before it was just literally the data in a raw format in a CSV file that you would have to then load into something else to view and modify and search on in yourself. We wanted to allow more customization to the user, which is what I was talking about with the letting you choose the fields which you determine are relevant and you determine are important to you, and then also provide a little bit more information on how this data links to your query. So with that, as Alex and Randy showed, you run your query like you would normally, and you can see on my query I have up here, which is the example I'm using, which is this linear sequence positive assays. You would then click on the export results, which would pop this window up within your browser, within the results page that shows the export to file options that you have, which is then you can export it out to your files. So I'm going to go through this to show you a little bit of the options that we have here when you're exporting these files. First off is the file format, which gives you these options. You have the XLS, which is the Excel format, which is one of the big things that when you do this new custom export redesign, we wanted to get native Excel format because we know that a lot of our users, when they want to use this in a human readable format, they would load the CSV into Excel. Well, this way we have it already in Excel format, which is the most user-friendly format, and allows for these multiple sheets to give you additional data beyond just the raw data, and it also gives us a little bit more customization on our formatting, so you can see the headers here and everything else. You then have comma-separated values, which is a standard within the data consumption fields, which is just all of the data separated by commas. Tab separated, which is the same as comma separated, but just using tabs. Again, this is more an option. Usually you would choose these because of whatever you're going to use to consume the data would prefer comma or tabs. And then finally, we have this JSON, which is a JavaScript object notation, which is used quite extensively in programming applications to pass around data within web applications. And you can see an example here, which has it in the format that you would use in those applications. The next option you have within the export to file box is the header formats, which you can see in those previous examples, which allows you to either select double headers, which has a section header and then a field row header, which just gives you a little bit more idea of bringing these data together, because we group our sections and our exports together, which you'll see later on when I go through these columns. And then it also has the field row, which is describes what that is. The single header, which combines the section header and the field header into one row, which is more the traditional export format with a header row that you would use on other websites or other ways to introduce it. And then finally, you have the option of no headers, which if you just want the raw data to process it however you want, this is the other option you can go with. So the next one is we have these concept of header or export types. And these are pre-selected subsets of our fields that we chose to let you export in formats that we think would be the most useful, I guess, for the majority of our users. And the options you have are the full, which is all of the data, the default, which is what the IEDB team kind of came up with as what we would see most users wanting. You have the default, which included IRI columns, which is the same as the default, but we also include IRI fields, which are identifiers within those things. The IEDB website displayed, which will match your query exactly what you're seeing on that tab. So this is where you would go if you want to export those, say those assay counts for the Epitope results that isn't available on the other exports because it's so specialized to the website displayed. And then finally, you have the custom export, which is the meat and potatoes of exporting here, where you can choose your columns that you want to export and use. So I'm going to go into a little bit on the IEDB website displayed. I talked about it briefly on the previous slide, but it's a special export. It directly exports what is shown on that particular tab. So for Epitope, you can see that you have the ID, the epitope, the antigen, the organism, and then the assay and reference counts. Because this is a special export, this one cannot be modified or added to the other exports because of those, in particular, those count fields are specialized. So here is an example of the custom export functionality. It allows the user to fine-grain their customization of the export set columns that they want explicitly. You can expand this tree structure here, which is similar to what we use in other places in the site, to show the fields below the sections that you would want to select. Full sections can be chosen or unchecked by clicking on the boxes next to that section. And you can see if you select specific fields below the sections, it'll modify it to show this half box to show that you have fields selected below that section, but not all of them or none of them. So what you could do is if you want to select these, so say you want to add modifications, you would click modifications here. It would then select this box, and then your export would include the modifications field in your results when you export it. So here's some examples of what you can select from our different tabs. You have the Epitope here. You can see they have the Epitope sections. The antigen one is pretty much the same as the website displayed because they don't have as many particular custom fields to include with those exports. Assay ones are all drastically different, and that's where you would get a lot of the data that Randy showed on those detail pages. A lot of that data is included in these options here. And this is where, again, the export types where the default would come in handy because it is really specialized on the fields that are in there, and there's just a lot of data in there that you may or may not want when you're analyzing that data. We have the receptor ones, which again has a lot more data that you don't see on the results tab, but you would probably want on your exports. And finally, we have the reference export options here, which you can see all the options here. Conclusion on that, we are looking at adding additional improvements, and I will go over this. We have the query parameters in Excel exports via new sheet and in the JSON exports. We have the inclusion of the export date in the Excel and the JSON exports, and we have the field descriptions in the Excel via a new sheet. You can see those here. This is in a new sheet where you can see all the data that you would need here for that particular export. Then also within the Excel export, we have this help tab, which goes over and shows each of the fields in that export and gives you a little bit more information, including some examples of what's in there and the description of the field, and then a link to a help topic if we have one within the IEDB database to give you a little bit more information again on that field and how it pertains to the IEDB. We added the custom export field to the API, which I'm going to go over after this. We are looking at, we are currently in the development of including the API URL into our exports when applicable. And we're constantly evaluating what fields and export types we are going to include. In fact, we have a special one that is going to be gone over on with the receptors on one of the other days of this workshop. And then also we're looking at specializing the field list for the CEDAR database, which is the IEDB's sister cancer website. So with that said, the other option, the final option to get data out of the IEDB is through the query API, the IQ API, which is how you would get the data out programmatically. So what is the API and why does it exist? An API is an application programming interface, which is a machine-based interface that you can write into that you can access via scripts or via projects to extract data programmatically out of the IEDB. Sorry. This is an alternative interface to the query of the IEDB. Content is identical to the web-based, but the format is different. and it is again, it's where common interface for web servers and other applications. And as you can see, I think this number has actually gone up since then. It's used for at least 850 queries a day in the IEDB currently. So how does it work? It's available via this base URL. You would then append on an endpoint that which lines up with our results tabs, either Epitope, T-cell, antigens, or examples. You would then put in our filters that you would want, and then finally you can see we have a whole URL here to query, and this is again mimicking that query I showed in the previous one. Results are returned. You can see right here, one row per epitope for this example. Again, similar to the exports you would get from the website or what you would see on the website. Here's a T-cell example. And then, so there's a couple of different ways to refine your query. You can do horizontal filtering, which is similar to a select query if you're familiar with database calls, where you select the fields that you would want to return. Again, this is also similar to the custom exports, where you select what fields you want to get out. And then we also have vertical filtering, which is similar to how the filters we use on the website, where you would select what fields you want to search parameters within those particular fields. So this example here is, you can see we're searching for this linear sequence within the linear sequence fields. So this is all built within a what's called Postgres interface, which is an open source API interface, which has these operators which you can mimic pretty much all of the database call filters that you would want. The most useful ones is this is the one you would use most frequently, is the equal things, which is basically you're saying you want where this linear sequence is equal to this synfecal, or contains, where if you want to search on the linear sequence that contains this linear sequence. So we structured it so that all of our endpoints have similar parameters, except some you can see are pluralized if they are an array of values, because, for example, this antigen is associated with multiple linear sequences, whereas the epitope is associated with one linear sequence. But we made sure to keep it all similar so you can run your query on one endpoint and then replicate it across multiple endpoints if needed be. So why would you want to use our API versus something else? It gives you direct access to computer-friendly and human-friendly formats without having to use the web interface. This is important if you want to incorporate the IEDB data and queries into your code and use that data in the language of whatever you use to write your application or your interface. It allows easy link between the IEDB and other resources, and it also allows you a quick and easy way to periodically run automated queries against that you would like for your particular data set, checking weekly or monthly or however often you would like to check. So what can you query within the API? If it's in the IEDB interface, it should be available in the API. If it's not, make sure to message us, because we would love challenges to try to figure out how to replicate the interface, web interface within the API, because that's how the API is designed to work. So if you want to get started, we recommend using the Swagger documentation, which is a visualization layer within the API. So you can go to this link and see what all is within the API and run some queries within this interface directly without having to do it programmatically. But it gives you a jumping off point. So if you can see, if we were running this query within the Swagger documentation, you would open up the epitope search, you'd go down to linear sequence, put in your search parameters here, and go from there. And then you can run that, and you can get the live results right there in a window within the Swagger documentation. So I have some examples here of various different languages: Python, PHP, jQuery. How you would return results and access the API, and then return the results and use that data. I'm going to quickly try to go through. As I mentioned earlier, we now have all of the custom export fields within the API now, so you can get the full data set, running your query against the search tables, and then linking those to the export tables, and then you can get vastly more data out of the API now, as you can see here. I'm going to try to quickly go through these because I'm coming up against my time. All of our search endpoints have analogous export endpoints, with the exception of Antigen, again, because Antigen is such a small export. It's keyed on identifiers, and then the names are converted to directly match what is in the export for ease of use. So you can see here, you would run the query, get your group, get your ID, and then run your export there. You can also do this via resource embedding, which I would take a little bit of time to go through. But here is a list of a bunch of different resources that you could use to get more information, including our discourse, which I think is going to be gone over next. So here's it. And so I think that's my time, Nina.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly, for that.